It's very exciting to be the kickoff talk for the Stinkwort workshop. We have been looking forward to this for a really long time. And I want to start by giving a huge thank you to Miranda Meelan, who has done an amazing job of pulling this all together. Miranda has been the one on the front lines working with the speakers. She's also the chair of our planning committee and has done an incredible job of covering all of the details and setting up so many amazing things to make it a really valuable and productive day for all of us. So thank you, Miranda. I'd also like to thank Miranda, as well as our collaborator, Nikki Listenhauer and Ingrid Parker from Cal IPSI for their contributions to this talk. And my job today is really to just set the stage. So as Miranda said, there's a lot of folks in the room who have a lot of experience with Stinkwort. And there's a bunch of folks who have really very little experience or just getting to know this plant. And what we want to do today, starting off, is just to bring everybody up to speed on some of the basics, the basic biology of the plant, the history of its invasion in California, and some things that we know about it or think about its potential impacts. And then I'm going to spend a little time defining the WMAs. I wanted to acknowledge someone online who said, hey, it would be great if we kind of minimize the acronyms to make sure that everyone can follow along. So I thought a really great place to start would be to talk about WMAs and how they help stakeholders come together. So that's my job in this talk. So Stinkwort, Detrichia graveolens. In the literature, it's known by several other taxonomic names. So you might see papers about Inula or Erigeron graveolens. It's an annual plant. It reaches about 1 meter tall. It's fall flowering. In a minute, we'll talk about why that's significant. It's sticky and stinky. It's in the family Asteraceae, and that means that it can be sort of hard to tell apart from some of the many other Asteraceae weeds that we deal with. And that is where it's useful to remember that it's sticky and stinky. It is also, I wanted to draw a distinction between stinkwort and stinknet, which is another species that many of you are dealing with or hearing about. It's also a new Asteraceae invader in California, and it's being talked about a lot. I just want to make it clear that that's Onchocyphon, and that is not the species that we're talking about today. Okay, stinkwort was first introduced into California probably in the early 80s. It's the first record that we have of it is from 1984, right down the road here in Alviso, California. So it really started, the invasion started here in the Bay Area. And the first populations of stinkwort were found along railroad tracks. So that might give you some ideas about how it first arrived here. In the first couple of decades, it spread rapidly throughout the central and northern California, especially along roadsides. You can kind of see the different roadside invasions happening on the map. And then by a couple more decades along, we are already in most California counties dealing with stinkwort. So currently, stinkwort is in 49 of our 58 California counties. And you might notice from the map that there was this interesting pattern where it seems to have popped up all of a sudden in Southern California. And so one of the questions that we all have is, where did those new invasions come from? Were they a transplant from the Bay Area, or do they represent a new invasion? And this is my opportunity to point out Patrick Moran. Patrick. Great. Patrick Moran is joining us here from USDA ARS. And Patrick is starting a new program on biocontrol of stinkwort in California, which we're very excited about, seeing lots of enthusiasm around the room, Patrick. And Ingrid Parker will actually be giving us a bit of an update from Patrick's work in the final talk today. But I wanted to say that part of the early phase of that work is to figure out where is the origin of the invasions in California. And so Patrick and his collaborators in France are doing some really exciting work on that. I'm showing you here some very preliminary genetic data that Patrick was willing to share that kind of gives you a sense of the way that these sorts of data can be used. So it's showing the Southern California, some samples from the Southern California invasions in group A. compared to collections from the Bay Area in Group B. And it shows that there is some suggestion that these might have genetic differences, these two different groups, which is consistent with the idea that maybe Southern California represents a separate introduction. But we're going to stay tuned for a couple more years. Hopefully, we'll get to see more of that information coming from Patrick in the near future. Okay, why are we worried about Stinkwort? Well, this is one of those photos that is worth 1,000 words, I think. And one of the motivations for doing this workshop is to have a chance to hear more from the folks on the ground of what you are seeing and what you are worried about in terms of the potential impacts of Stinkwort. There's not a lot published on Stinkwort impacts in California. And so a lot of the information that we have out there is actually coming from Australia, where Stinkwort was introduced in the mid-1800s. So it's actually been there for a while. And around the turn of the last century, Stinkwort was one of the top agricultural weeds. In fact, it was the biggest weed problem in wheat in Australia. Here in California, we do know some things from its effects on rangelands. We know that it is poor fodder because most livestock avoid it. And there are some reports from Australia, again, of sheep eating it in the seed production stage. And, the seeds, or technically fruits of Stinkwort, have these plumes, these pappus, which are barbed. So they actually have sharp barbs on them. And it's reported that that may cause a damage to the digestive tracts of livestock. So that's one of the reasons we're worried about it. There's also reports that it causes milk tainting in dairy cattle. So that, and the fact that it also causes contact dermatitis in some people, is related to its complex plant chemistry. Stinkwort has high chemical diversity, so it's full of a complex combination of monoterpenes and sesquiterpenes. And one of the interesting things about that is they actually make essential oils from Stinkwort, which you can buy online under the name Odorous Inula, if anybody likes the smell of Detrichia. And related to that complex chemistry, it's also been used in traditional medicine in its native range. So that's very interesting. These chemicals have shown antifungal and antibacterial properties, and it's been used as an anti-inflammatory and a sedative. And in fact, there's even reports of it being used to treat chicken lice. So that is your Stinkwort fun fact for the day. USDA has done a weed risk assessment of Detrichia graveolens, and they rank it as a high risk of being a major invader because both of it for its potential for rapid establishment and spread, that's on the x-axis, as well as its potential for high impact, which is on the y-axis. So USDA definitely has this species on their radar, and that is part of why they are actually funding this workshop today. So we are very grateful to them for a grant that we received from USDA, and part of that grant funded the workshop. Within our state of California, CDFA has also rated Stinkwort, and they put it on the Section 4500 list of California noxious weeds, which that weed list includes species that are defined as troublesome, aggressive, intrusive, detrimental, or destructive to agriculture, silviculture, or important native species, and difficult to control or eradicate. The importance of Stinkwort being on this list is that species on this list are prohibited from entry into the state or sale within the state. And they are also eligible for certain kinds of funding. And that's important to know as we start talking about WMAs, and Yuta will be talking about some of our potential opportunities in the final talk today. Cal IPSI has also done work of rating Stinkwort, and the committee that covered Stinkwort, did this work, I believe, in the early 2000s, and it was chaired by John Bell. And John was originally going to be one of our speakers here at the workshop, but he got pulled away into an important work-related responsibility, so he couldn't be here with us. But we do appreciate his work through CalIPSY. The team ranked Stinkwort back in 2005 as moderate alert. And moderate species are species that have substantial and apparent, but generally not severe ecological impacts on physical properties, plant and animal communities, and vegetation structure. Their reproductive biology and other attributes are conducive to moderate to high rates of dispersal, though establishment is generally dependent upon ecological disturbance. So all of these features of Stinkwort are important in terms of the way we think about the risk of Stinkwort relative to other species. And I think one of the interesting conversations we could have today is just thinking about the different aspects of these ratings and whether we still feel that the most recent information that we all have as a community sort of supports this ranking. Okay, and that brings me to important data gaps. So I mentioned that there's not that much out there about the impacts of Detrichia graveolens in California. And so this workshop is really timely in terms of pulling together more information that you all have. A lot of the early work that we rely on was done by Rachel Brownsey, who is a science hero in our lab. She did her master's degree with Joe DiTomaso at UC Davis and has done amazing. Yeah, a lot of us really rely on her work. And I want to say hi to Rachel if she happens to be online right now. I know she was going to try to fit popping into the workshop into her schedule today. So if you're out there, Rachel, we just want to say how much we appreciate you. And this is actually part of Rachel's work. So this points out that one of the interesting things about Stinkwort is it has this very unusual phenology for California annuals. It's a late season annual, meaning it germinates in the winter. It grows as a green plant all the way through the summer when everything else is dying off. And then it goes to seed in the late fall. So there are very few California native plants that have this phenology and a few famous weeds, including yellow star thistle. But its phenology definitely has an impact on the way we manage it and the way we think about its biology. In terms of seeds, this is another area where we need more information. It appears that Stinkwort seeds have little inherent dormancy, but in terms of how long they live in the soil and what kinds of dynamics they show, that is an area where we really need a lot more information. And Miranda's going to start us off with some information about that in her talk this later today, because she has some cool experiments that she's doing. And similarly, what triggers germination is Rachel Brownsey did early work showing that Stinkwort does have these flushes of germination after heavy rainfall, but is that just once a year? Is that multiple times a year? How much does that vary from place to place? How much does it vary from year to year? These are all questions that we need more information on because they're really important questions for management. One of the things that makes that hard to study is that Stinkwort seedlings look a lot like a lot of other Asteraceae seedlings. So they can be kind of hard to identify in the field. Once they grow to be rosettes, they look like that. Their roots underground, as a rosette, they have this fibrous root system, which then as they start to bolt, develops into a pretty thick taproot. And that happens, as I said, like sort of deep into the summer. Then they go into their flowering phase and they start making seeds. One of the interesting things about Stinkwort seed production is that plants this big can make seeds, and plants can grow to be huge and also make seeds. And like many annuals, this plastic growth can play an important role in their ecology. There are some reports that if you cut or pull Stinkwort and set the plant aside while it's in its flowering phase, that it is capable of making seeds. And I think we've heard this from some folks here in our practitioner community here in California. And one of the questions that we have is like, how often does that happen? And has anybody done an experiment where they actually tested for the viability of those seeds? Because that is kind of a key piece of information that we need. So if anybody here has done viability testing on seeds that produced by zombie stinkwort, we would love to hear that today. And if not, then somebody should do that experiment. Okay, so that brings us to the end, the last part of my talk, which is about stakeholders. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about WMAs. This is for many of you in the room, very old information, but for some of us, pretty new and certainly relevant to understanding what potential we have here to work together. So we are a diverse and fabulous group. And these are the associated institutions and agencies that are represented today just in the room. And that is not even including the 120 plus people who are registered online. So it is really exciting to me to have such a diverse group of folks here talking together, working together on this problem. And we're talking about local, county, state, and regional agencies and land management groups. We've got federal agencies, we have nonprofits, we have the private sector, including our ranching community who are represented here today, and we're really glad that they're here. And a number of different universities are represented and university affiliated groups. So welcome to everyone. And this is just a really exciting consortium of folks. And we have to thank the WMAs for helping pull this together. So our weed management areas have been really, as Miranda said, really played an important role in getting the word out about this workshop and coordinating all of us in terms of our interests in weed management. And I just want to say, for those who don't know, weed management agencies are stakeholder collaborations. They are county and state, federal agencies and nonprofits and private groups. They're coordinated by county agricultural commissioner offices, and in some places, the resource conservation districts. And the history of WMAs is they actually just got started in 1999. They were established by some visionary legislation. And I've been talking with Nancy about how like some folks in this room actually have been involved in WMAs since the very beginning. They've had their ups and downs. In fact, the program was eliminated in 2011 during the last big budget crisis, but then they were reinstated in 2018. And we have some updates about the WMAs and how they are functioning and some opportunities that Yuta will share at the end of today. But I did want to point out the goals of the WMAs are to identify strategic priorities, share updates, and coordinate projects across jurisdictions. So this is a perfect opportunity for them. So we have some amazing talks for you today across many different topics in Detrichia biology and management. And in addition, as Miranda emphasized as well, like a big part of the vision for this workshop is really to facilitate networking and sharing information. So this is crowdsourced science and crowdsourced management, and we hope that you will really take that in to heart. We're going to give you opportunities today in structured time, including the lunch period, to do that networking. And now it is time to bring up, I think, our next talk. So thank you.